Imagine, for a moment, that you are a weapon. You are not just a man. From the moment you could walk, you were molded for a singular, terrifying purpose: to kill with efficiency and to die with grace. Your hands are calloused from swinging a bakken, a wooden sword, thousands of times a day, every day, until your palms bled and healed into leather. You were taught that your life does not belong to you. It belongs to your lord. It belongs to your clan. It belongs to the emperor. You are the elite. You are a samurai. For centuries, this identity was the highest honor in Japan. When you walked down the muddy streets of a village, the world stopped. Farmers, knee-deep in rice paddies, would freeze and bow low, pressing their foreheads into the dirt. Merchants would step aside, averting their eyes, terrified to even breathe too loudly in your presence. They knew the law, kirisu gomen, authorization to cut and leave. If a commoner disrespected you, you had the legal right to strike them down where they stood, wipe your blade clean, and walk away without consequence. Your word was law. Your armor was a symbol of order. Your blade was considered the very soul of Japan. You were the wall that stood between your people and chaos. But then, the unthinkable happens. It doesn't happen with a bang or a glorious last stand. It happens in the silence. The wars that defined your existence simply stop. The warlords shake hands. The borders are drawn. The fires of Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, burn out, replaced by a suffocating, bureaucratic peace. Almost overnight, the world you were built for vanishes. The masters you swore to protect with your life are stripped of their lands by the new shogunate. Some are exiled. Others are executed. And you are not killed. That would have been a mercy. That would have been honorable. Instead, you are fired. The stipend of rice that fed your family is cut off. The castle gates are locked against you. You stand outside the walls you once defended, holding a sword that no one needs anymore. Suddenly, you aren't a hero. You are a nuisance. You are a dangerous surplus. You are a weapon with no war to fight, a walking relic in a world that is trying desperately to forget the bloodshed of the past. This isn't a fictional drama. This is the brutal, psychological reality that crushed Japan's legendary samurai class in the early 17th century. We often romanticize the samurai in movies and anime as eternal. Stoic warriors wander in the land in search of adventure. We see the cool aesthetic, the straw hats, the dual swords, the brooding silence. But the truth is far darker and far more tragic. Japan didn't just lose its samurai. It systematically destroyed them. It took the most feared, disciplined, and lethal warriors in human history and turned them into beggars. It forced men who had led armies to make umbrellas and bird cages in secret just to afford a bowl of rice. It turned protectors of the realm into homeless wanderers, desperate mercenaries, and eventually outcasts who were feared not for their honor, but for their desperation. This is the origin of the Ronin. The term itself is poetic but heartbreaking. Ronin literally translates to wave man. It describes a person who is like a wave on the ocean, drifting aimlessly, with no shore to crash upon, no direction, and no home. In a society like Japan, where your worth was defined by who you served and where you belonged, becoming a wave man was a fate worse than death. It meant you were socially invisible. You were a ghost while you were still breathing. How did the architects of Japan's history allow this to happen? How did the government turn its own military class into an enemy of the state? And who was responsible for ending the age of the sword? To understand this tragedy, we have to look beyond the myth. We have to strip away the romance and look at the cold, hard politics of survival. We have to go back to the moment the fighting stopped, the moment the samurai realized that the peace they had fought so hard to win was actually their death sentence. For over a century, Japan was not truly a country. It was a graveyard. This was the era of the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. It was a time when the emperor was nothing more than a figurehead, a puppet in a golden palace. While the real power lay in the blood-soaked mud of the battlefield, the nation was fractured into dozens of tiny fiefdoms, each ruled by a warlord or daimyo who had only one ambition: absolute conquest. In this chaotic slaughterhouse, the samurai were kings. It was a brutal meritocracy. It didn't matter if you were born poor or rich. If you could swing katana, ride a horse, or shoot a bow with deadly precision, you had a future. You had a job. You had status. Violence was a currency of the realm, and the samurai were the richest men in Japan. They were essential because survival was impossible without them. But all of that ended on a cold, foggy morning on October 21st, 1600. The location was a narrow valley crossroads called Sekigahara. This was the moment history held its breath. It was a battle to end all battles, the largest gathering of samurai the world had ever seen, and likely ever would see. Over 160,000 men stood facing each other across the valley floor, waiting for the signal to unleash hell. On one side stood the Western Army, a coalition loyal to the old Toyotomi regime, fighting to preserve the status quo. On the other stood the Eastern Army, led by the most patient and cunning man in Japanese history, Tokugawa Ieyasu. For hours, the battle raged in a stalemate, obscured by thick fog and blinding rain. But as the sun broke through, treachery struck. A key general betrayed the Western Army. Switching sides in the heat of combat, the lines collapsed. The slaughter was industrial. When the dust finally settled, thousands lay dead, and Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged as the absolute, undisputed ruler of Japan. He established the Tokugawa Shogunate, a military dictatorship that would rule with an iron fist for over 250 years. But as Ieyasu surveyed his new empire, he didn't feel safe. Tokugawa Ieyasu was a genius, but he was also deeply, logically paranoid. He looked at the country he had just conquered and saw a massive problem. The very thing that had won him the war, the samurai, was now the biggest threat to his peace. Japan was filled with hundreds of thousands of battle-hardened killers. These were men who had known nothing but war for generations. They were ambitious, they were armed, and now they were bored. Ieyasu knew that a country full of unemployed warriors was a recipe for rebellion. If he wanted his family to rule forever, he had to neutralize the warrior class. He couldn't kill them all, so he did something smarter. He bankrupted them. The shogunate began a ruthless campaign of political restructuring known as kaiki. It was a bureaucratic purge disguised as law. Tokugawa targeted the daimyo who had fought against him at Sekigahara. He stripped them of their territories, confiscated their castles, and dissolved their clans. In a modern sense, imagine a massive corporation being shut down by the government overnight. When the CEO, the daimyo, loses his company, the employees, the samurai, lose their jobs. It was a catastrophe. In the blink of an eye, thousands upon thousands of elite warriors were fired. They were stripped of their income, their homes, and their purpose. They were cast out of the castle towns they had sworn to defend. These men were now masterless. They became Ronin. The tragedy was bitter and ironic. These samurai had fought bravely to bring peace to Japan, believing that victory would bring them rewards, land, and glory. Instead, the peace they won became the very thing that destroyed them. The war was over, and the new Japan had no use for soldiers. The heroes of Sekigahara were left standing in the rain, holding invoices that would never be paid. Under the iron grip of the Tokugawa Shogunate, Japan didn't just stop fighting. It froze in time. The government locked the country's doors, entering the era of Sengoku, total isolation. No one came in, no one went out. Inside the sealed pressure cooker, they built a social hierarchy so rigid that it might as well have been made of stone. This was the Shinokosho system, a caste system that decided your destiny before you were even born. Society was sliced into 4 distinct tiers. At the bottom were the merchants, viewed as parasites because they created nothing, only moved money around. Above them were artisans. Then came the farmers, respected because they produced a food that fed the nation. And at the very top, untouchable and supreme, were the warriors, the samurai. On paper, the samurai were gods among men. They were the masters of the social universe. They were the only class permitted to carry the daisho, the pair of swords that symbolized their soul and their authority. A samurai walking down the streets of Edo, modern Tokyo, was a walking weapon of mass destruction. They held the terrifying right of kirisa gomen, literally, authorization to cut and leave. If a merchant splashed mud on a samurai's hakama or failed to bow low enough, the samurai could legally draw his blade, cut the man down, and walk away without facing a judge. But you cannot eat prestige. You cannot pay your rent with fear. The shogunate had enforced a policy of armed peace. For the first time in history, the samurai had absolutely nothing to do. There were no borders to defend, no rebellions to crush, and no heads to take. The government didn't need warriors anymore. They needed accountants. They needed administrators. The fierce, bloodthirsty class of the Sengoku period was forced to undergo a bizarre transformation. High-ranking samurai were told to trade their armor for silk robes. They were moved from the battlefield to the office desk. The hand that once held a spear now held a calligraphy brush. They became bureaucrats, pushing papers, stamping forms, and managing tax records. The glorious warrior had become a glorified salaryman. But for the lower-ranking samurai in the Ronin, this peace was a disaster. This is where the trap snapped shut. The caste system was a golden cage. Because they were technically aristocracy, samurai were legally forbidden from engaging in common work. A samurai could not become a farmer. He could not open a shop. He could not trade goods. To do so would be a disgrace to his ancestors and a violation of the law. Yet, many of them had no lords to pay them. Those who did have lords were paid in koku, bales of rice, a currency that became less valuable every year as the merchant class manipulated the economy. They were trapped in a paradox. They were too high status to work, but too poor to eat. They were forced to maintain a painful, humiliating charade. A samurai had to look the part. He had to have proper robes, polished swords, and a clean appearance. To look poor was to lose honor. So, they starved behind closed doors to look wealthy on the street. There was a famous saying from this era, Bashi wa kuanido takeyoji. A samurai uses a toothpick even when he's not eaten. It meant that even if your stomach was screaming with hunger, you walked out of your house picking your teeth, pretending you had just finished a feast. The reality inside their homes was heartbreaking. To survive, proud warriors were forced into secret, shameful labor. Deep in the night, by the light of a single candle, men who were trained to kill would sit hunched over, using their callous hands to craft paper umbrellas, lanterns, or bamboo bird cages. They would sell these trinkets through back channels to the very merchants they despised, just to buy enough rice to survive the week. They lived in constant terror that a neighbor might hear the scraping of the bamboo or see the glue on their fingers. If they were discovered, their shame would be absolute. The warrior class was being slowly suffocated by the weight of its own tradition. The peace they protected was killing them one paper umbrella at a time. As the years of the Edo period turned into decades, the Ronin problem didn't go away. It festered. Japan was now filled with a swelling population of men who had been raised on stories of glory, only to wake up in a world of poverty. These weren't just unemployed soldiers. They were dangerous, disaffected, and heavily armed men who felt completely betrayed by the system. They were a ticking time bomb in the heart of the shogunate. With no wars to fight and no lords to serve, the Ronin fractured into different paths. For the lucky few, there was the path of the Yojimbo, the hired bodyguard. You might see this in movies, where a stoic warrior protects a village for a bag of rice. But in reality, this was a humiliation. To sell your sword for money, rather than loyalty, was considered a degradation of the samurai soul. It was mercenary work, often protecting wealthy merchants, the very class the samurai were supposed to despise. But for many others, the path was much darker. They turned to crime. If the government wouldn't let them live as warriors, they would live as outlaws. Gangs of Ronin began to roam the countryside and the back streets of Edo. They became known as kabukimono, the crazy ones, or those who tilt. They wore gaudy, flamboyant kimonos, styled their hair in wild shapes, and carried oversized swords. They were the punks of the 17th century. These men terrorized the common people. They tested their swords on innocent passers-by. They ran illegal gambling rings and protection rackets. Historians trace the origins of the modern Yakuza directly back to these groups. The honorable code of Bushido, the way of the warrior, was twisted into a criminal code of silence and violence. The common people, who had once bowed to the samurai in reverence, now bowed in fear. The noble protector had become a parasite. However, the spirit of the true warrior didn't die easily. In the midst of this corruption, one story emerged that brought the entire nation to tears. This is a legend of the 47 Ronin, the AKO incident. In 1701, a daimyo named Asano was forced to commit ritual suicide after assaulting a corrupt court official who had insulted him. His 47 retainers became Ronin instantly. By law, they should have disbanded and accepted their fate. But they didn't. For 2 years, they lived in shame. They pretended to be drunkards and gamblers to fool the government spies. They let their enemies believe they had given up, but in secret, they were planning. On a snowy night in December 1702, they launched a raid on the corrupt official's mansion, cut off his head, and marched it across the city to their master's grave. They then turned themselves in and were ordered to commit seppuku, ritual suicide. They died as criminals in the eyes of the law, but they died as gods in the eyes of the people. Why did this story resonate so deeply? Why do Japanese people still visit their graves today? Because the 47 Ronin represented something that was vanishing. In a world that had become obsessed with money, bureaucracy, and survival, these men chose honor. They chose loyalty over life. For a brief moment, the Ronin weren't beggars or thugs. They were the moral compass of Japan. But we must remember, stories like the 47 Ronin were the exception, not the rule. They were a flash of lightning in a very long, dark night. For the vast majority of Ronin, there was no glorious revenge. There was only the grinding struggle of daily life. The shogunate was terrified of them. The government set up a massive surveillance network to watch the Ronin. They were registered, tracked, and often banished from major cities if they caused trouble. The Ronin became a symbol of the system's failure. They were men created for a purpose that no longer existed. They were lions kept in a zoo, pacing back and forth, waiting for a gate that would never open. They were the wave men, drifting further and further away from the shore, waiting for the final wave that would wash them away for good. The slow death of the samurai had been dragging on for 2.5 centuries. They had survived poverty, humiliation, and irrelevance. But the final execution didn't happen in a whisper. It happened with a roar of steam and iron. In 1853, the world arrived at Japan's doorstep uninvited. Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy sailed 4 massive warships into Edo Bay. The Japanese called them Kurofian, the Black Ships. They belched black smoke that darkened the sky, and their cannons were large enough to level the shogun's castle from the water. In that singular, terrifying moment, the Japanese government realized a hard truth. Their isolation was over. Their beautiful curved swords, their code of Bushido, and their centuries of martial tradition were completely useless against modern industry, steam engines, and rifled muskets. Japan faced a choice: modernize immediately or be colonized like the rest of Asia. This crisis triggered the Meiji Restoration. In 1868, the shogunate was overthrown, and the emperor was restored to supreme power. The new government adopted a ruthless motto for Kokukohei: enrich the country, strengthen the military. But in this new vision of a strong military, there was no room for individual warriors. The samurai were viewed as an expensive relic of a feudal past that needed to be erased. The samurai were the first casualty of Japanese progress. The dismantling was surgical and humiliating. First, the government abolished the caste system. Overnight, the samurai were no longer special. They were just citizens, equal to the farmers and merchants they had looked down upon for 1,000 years. Next came the economic blow. The government converted their hereditary stipends, the rice salaries paid to them for centuries, into government bonds that were worth a fraction of the value. Thousands of samurai families plummeted into absolute poverty. But the ultimate insult, the one that broke their spirit, came in 1876 with the Heitoriai Edict. For 1,000 years, the soul of the samurai was his sword. It was believed to house his spirit. To take a man's sword was to castrate him spiritually. But the Heitoriai Edict made it illegal to carry weapons in public. Imagine the psychological shock. A class of men who had walked the streets with the swagger of gods were suddenly forced to leave their homes unarmed. The police, often recruited from the common classes, would arrest former samurai for carrying the symbol of their identity. The top knot, chamage, was cut off in favor of Western haircuts. The transformation was total. To replace them, the government created a conscript army. They took rice farmers, factory workers, and fishermen, gave them uniforms, and handed them bolt-action rifles. This was the death of the warrior mystique. A samurai spent his entire life mastering the art of the blade. A peasant could be taught to shoot a gun in 2 weeks. And at 200 yards, a bullet from a peasant kills a master swordsman just the same. The monopoly on violence that the samurai had held for a millennium was gone. The tension finally snapped in 1877 with the Satsuma Rebellion, led by Seigo Takamori. Often called the Last Samurai, a group of disaffected samurai rose up against the new imperial government. It was a final, desperate scream of the old world. But this wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The samurai charged down the hills of Kagoshima armed with swords and traditional armor, driven by honor and spirit. Waiting for them at the bottom was a new imperial army, armed with howitzers and Gatling guns. The result was a massacre. The brutal efficiency of the future mowed down the past. There was no glory in the face of industrial warfare. The rebellion was crushed. Seigo died, and the age of the samurai ended not with a victory, but with a pile of bodies in the mud. Japan didn't just forget its warriors. It actively destroyed them to build a modern nation. The Ronin and the samurai faded into history, becoming ghosts in the machine of modern Japan. Today, the samurai are gone, but their shadow remains. Their discipline was transferred into the boardrooms of corporate Japan, where corporate warriors give their lives to the company instead of a lord. But the lesson of their fall remains brutal and clear. Tradition, no matter how noble, cannot stop the turning wheels of time. Even the most powerful can be rendered obsolete when the world changes around them. The modernization of Japan was a miracle, but we must never forget that it was paid for in blood. The samurai weren't just warriors. They were the soul of a nation, sacrificed on the altar of progress. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the tragic end of the samurai, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are building a community of history lovers here at The Last Offensive, and we have more untold stories coming soon. Question for you. Do you think the samurai could have survived in the modern world, or was their extinction inevitable? Let me know in the comments below. This is The Last Offensive. See you on the next battlefield.